It's really great to be back today again with Haris and Gabe, and we are going to do part 2 of this effort of looking at art and science and psychology and see where the interconnections are. In our previous episode, we did 5 works of art as a springboard to talk about each one of these concepts, and Haris is kind of leading us with an initial discussion of each concept, and then Gabe is going to pop in with his theory, and we're going to do some conceptual mapping. So Haris, why did you choose the yin-yang symbol for number 6 here?
Yes, basically in Gabriel's model, the sixth let's say principle, it's actually intercourse. And when I was trying to figure out the different master artworks that I wanted to present to you in order to facilitate our discussion, I got this sense that I need to introduce an exception to that rule. So that exception actually popped out into this particular, let's say, principle, the principle of intercourse. And instead of choosing, a traditional, let's say, piece of art, I went after a symbol. So I went after the traditional Eastern symbol of the yin and yang, and I purposely chose this one for this principle in order to present also the other side, let's say, that is ongoing in terms of art. So it's not only the traditional conception that we have of an artwork or of an engraving, let's say, but maybe it's something that it moves a bit beyond that conception. And in this particular case, as we are tackling something that is really fundamental as the concept, let's say, of intercourse, what I wanted to present here is this type of symbol. And it's not necessarily complex, and it's also not necessarily simple. So it is a simple use in many Eastern traditions, but it is also one that made its way into the West, and into the Western psyche, as Jung would have called it. And it depicts actually this dance between the two opposites. And I am not very fond of having the opposite in terms of bad and good, specifically for this case, but we can see that we can have let's say, the positive aspects dancing together with the negative aspects. And the negative aspects, once again, it's not that they are necessarily bad, but maybe what they are actually representing is the notion of the emptiness. So, in terms of let's say we have a 3D structure, like a house, let's say, what's important in terms of description is not only the structural elements that compose that structure, but it is also the emptiness that it is within the structure. So this notion, I find it to be extremely helpful and even fascinating, as it is well aligned also with the notion of the apophatic and the cataphatic. So and just to conclude a bit on my introduction on this symbol, of course, the yin part, it represents one part of the whole, and as you can see within it, it is a smaller part of the other aspect of the yang, and vice versa. And the most important aspect and the whole secret, let's say, behind it is that it's not only a symbol of the yin and the yang, but it's a symbol of the yin yang. So to put it in terms of colors, it's not only a symbol of the black and the white, but of the black white. So once again, in terms of symbology and psychology, some of them couple each of those two sides with the feminine aspects and the masculine aspects that we have also got the chance to look into the our previous part, the first part of this conceptual scaffold. And yes, this concludes my introduction to this symbol. So I will be fascinated to hear your thoughts, to both of you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And I think it's an excellent choice for not just the dynamic of intercourse, that particular realm in my model. It's fundamental to the very pattern that underlies each one of these things. And to stay on the aspect of intercourse, I look at that to a degree as the creative aspect. It's, if you think in terms of the masculine and feminine, which was the prior aspect of the model, intercourse is the means of creating new life. So it is very much a creative, making a new aspect of the model. And I separate those two. The inner is the kinship and the outer is the libido. And the kinship is associated with a sort of turning in, a pair bonding, that union that is required or recommended very highly to provide a home and a structure for the creation of new life of a child. And the libido is associated with pursuit, which is the going after, not just for provision to bring back in, but also turning inward for the purposes of conception. So if you think of the two leaving mother and father and joining together in one flesh, there's a moving out aspect, as well as the act of conception, which is a moving in aspect. So there's that dynamic between the two, and it requires the cooperation and the coordination of the outer and the inner, the masculine and the feminine, the kinship and the libido, those aspects coming together in order to form new life, to create something new, to move that forward. Is kind of the basic idea.
I really like that, the moving out and moving in as being all part and parcel of the same image. A man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. So it's the moving out and the moving in, the outer and the inner, and the way that stacks up all through the universe. But I was thinking about the brain hemispheres here, and one of the things that Peterson and McGilchrist talk about all the time in reference to this is that the major effort of each hemisphere is actually inhibitory, inhibiting the action of the other hemisphere. And that's actually the majority of what they do is inhibitory, which I find kind of fascinating. And I mean, if I'm thinking about this, if I were to try to relate that to the idea of intercourse, the inhibitory action has the purpose of enhancing the final culmination of the union. That's all I can say.
Yeah, no, that's a excellent point to bring up, because that moves us into back to the model of the flower and the issue of, I guess, measurement and extremes. So if you think of uninhibited intercourse on the inner side, say the side of kinship, there is incest, which is an extreme of kinship. So the inhibitory aspects of the two sides seem to exist in a balance. And when you forcibly move into either extreme, so for example, on the side of libido, I've lost my place here. The extreme is violation. So you think of violating another person. So you have the inhibitory aspect seems to limit the extremes so that the two can come together in a balanced way. So instead of an incestual relationship, which could produce a child with serious problems, or a violation that could produce a child in a broken home, or even harm or kill a person involved, the inhibitory aspects of those two hemispheres, of those two different sides, the inner and the outer, working together, that it's not only that, I guess it is that balancing aspect, moving in to that balanced state to avoid the pain of those extremes and the potential debilitation, or debilitation, which is the anti-logos of that particular aspect.
Well, I was also thinking just of, even in a perfect union of intercourse between two people who are married and who love each other, there is something about each person has to have a certain amount of restraint in their own personal inner libido during the union in order to culminate in the most satisfying result. I don't know how to put this.
No,
It's
I
very
agree.
complicated, but I mean, it seems to me that the inhibitory part of that is probably the majority, because you extend the pleasure the longer that you wait for the result. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, no, I think I was speaking kind of on the community level, but moving to what you're talking about, which is kind of on the
I'm just saying these things work on every level, right?
Well,
you can't get away from it.
Sorry, I was agreeing with you. Like moving into the instead of a community level, moving into the coupling level, the marriage level. The balance of pursuit and pair bonding. It's like that's kind of what romance is. I think that's exactly what you're pointing at, is to have the maximum satisfaction and the greatest union. There is a balance between, I think that romance is that balance. It's a balance between bonding with one another and building relationship, and also enjoying each other physically and creating new life. That physical and that mental, that spiritual and that relational, it all has to be in balance between the two for it to work properly. And I think avoiding those extremes, even in the case of marriage, if the husband demands physical attention constantly, it's going to affect the pair bonding. And if the woman withholds physical attention or demands pair bonding without the balance of coming together as one flesh, as it's said, you run into that issue of imbalance in the case of the marriage level. So I agree with you. I was trying to agree with you.
Yeah, this is wonderful insights. So as far as I understand it, this symbol signifies both harmony and balance. So making this parallel, let's say, with the marriage between a couple that's beautiful, and it is a good reason it is called the sacred union, let's say, as the result of this intertwining. It can be the birth of a child, let's say, the propagation of life. So just another small comment in terms of etymology, the opposite word to inhibition is catalysis. So we have inhibitors as we have in chemistry, for example, and we also have the catalysts. So I think I agree with this notion that Karen mentioned, that most of the processes, let's say, they are inhibitory in nature. The catalyst seems to be more of a eventful, let's say, and more rare.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that catalysis was the opposite of inhibition in chemistry too. That's really interesting. Yeah.
As a last little point, I think, touching on what Karen you were saying, is the union of the two is not a dissolution of one or the other. You see the single circle, but it contains distinct aspects that remain. So it's not one taking over the other, one dissolving into the other. It's the union of the two and the balance between them. So
I think that's the beautiful thing about marriage, is that you when you each give 100%, you get back 200%.
yeah.
And when you each give as much of yourself as you can, you become more of who you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to number 7.
Yeah. The next principle in Gabriel's model is morality. And for that one, I have chosen the Tower of Babel by Pieter Bruegel Welter. And it depicts, of course, a very important moment in terms of our theology. And the Tower of Babel symbolizes human ambition, of course, and the consequences of overreaching. So the incomplete tower and the confusion of the workers reflect, of course, the biblical story of humanity's attempt to reach the heavens that resulted in the disruption of the communication. So I find this one to be a great reminder. And I have this feeling that as the years and the decades and the centuries move forward and on, it becomes more and more relevant. As also we are reaching out into novel forms of communication. Not only the internet, but even before that, we had the television, we had the telegram, and now we are even seeing this the rise of the artificial intelligence with all the large language models. So this is really something. I always love this painting because it serves as a reminder to this aspect of morality in our humanity.
Yeah, I like that you chose this one. It is very timely because we seem to be reversing the process of dividing up the languages that happened in the biblical story. Now with the LLMs and the translations and all that's available to aid communication. When it comes to the aspect of morality, I think I think the hardest part about morality is it is in many ways conditional upon the situation. So if you think of the dichotomy, which is built into the model of justice and mercy, when you're dealing, say, with a child who's, the example I like to use is a child who's drinking from a cup, or at least learning, very young, learning to drink from a cup, and spills on his shirt. As I would feel, the appropriate response is mercy in that moment. Mercy to the child in the midst of their process of learning. But then you think, as that child grows and learns to use the cup and learns to drink without spilling, if at some point the child spills the cup deliberately on their shirt, then the equation changes, and mercy is not necessarily the ideal response. It's more an issue of justice. And the extremes of the two, on the side of justice, it's contempt. So if justice goes undone, you think of being in contempt of court, you're preventing justice from coming, from becoming, from happening. And at the same time, if justice comes down, if it's overdone, and the fine or the jail time or whatever it is, the consequence, or what's the term? I can't think of the term at the moment, but whatever the judge hands down, if it's too extreme, then you find that not only is the judge treating the person with contempt, contempt also grows in the heart of someone who has received undue justice. In the case of too much of a fine or too much jail time or an extreme response to a minor infraction. And then on the same vein, on the side of mercy, the extreme is lawlessness. So if you think of that child dumping the contents of the cup on his shirt, you are dealing, if you apply mercy in that situation consistently, then not only will contempt grow in the heart of the one who has to do the laundry, you will be dealing with a lawless child. And lawlessness is the extreme of mercy, because if you allow everything, then there is no law. Whereas if you judge too harshly, there is contempt. And I think that's the separation between living righteously and living wickedly, is judiciously applying justice and mercy in your life, not only for yourself, but the people around you. And on the level of the individual, the family, and the community.
It's interesting. Gabriela, just wanted to make a small comment in terms of justice and courts. There is a specific notion called the kangaroo court, that it has to do with a court that actually doesn't have any legitimate, let's say, judicial authority, but actually, how do you say, it is something that it gets created in an ad hoc manner, and it serves to serve injustice and not justice, to put it in those terms. So we have seen, and we even have this expression, let's say, to describe such circumstances where the level of morality goes the other way.
Yeah, well, I think that's an excellent example. And to kind of turn it around as well, the people who deserve mercy in that situation are the ones who are subject to the kangaroo court, and the ones who deserve justice in that moment are the ones putting it on to serve their own stilted means. So you see the inversion of the process in that kangaroo court. So that's an excellent example of that.
So I'm going to limit myself to just talking about the picture here, I think.
Okay.
Because I think there's some really interesting things in this painting. Oh, maybe I'll say a few things outside of that. But anyway, let's take a look at the tower itself. I find this really fascinating. This is a human being's attempt to reach heaven, to make a name for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. They start out with a very large tower at the bottom, and a lot of effort is put into making it beautiful with all kinds of fancy fretwork on the structure and the doors and the windows and all that kind of stuff. And as they move up, you start to see, it's almost at like 2/3 of the point up, they start to realize, wait a minute, we're not going to have enough resources to go all the way up to heaven if we make this thing this big. So they start to narrow in make it slightly smaller. And then as they keep going up, it gets simpler and simpler until you get up to the very top. There isn't even like any, fancy decorations or anything. It's just very simple. And it's as though they're trying to get there, but to use as little resource as possible, because they started to realize that, wait, this job is way beyond our capacity. It's just such a perfect picture of how we are as human beings. The other thing that I want to say about this painting that I think is just so brilliant is, if you notice, most of the painting is this kind of green and blue with the yellow of the tower and everything. And then there's this little bit of red up there where the resources start running out. And because of that, that makes all the other pieces of red in the painting catch your eye. And so it draws you down, and you can see, oh, they're trying to bring resources in from the ocean. There's some blocks down there. It kind of brings your eye over to the lower left of the painting where there's these people, and it catches your eye. So he's moving your eye around the rectangle by using that color. There's a big block of it there that catches you in the beginning, and then you start to notice, oh, it shows up everywhere else. And that's the work of an artist, is to help you travel through the story and get all the elements that are important. And then the third thing I wanted to say is the necessity of morality for reaching truth. That was something that that Haris said in the very beginning. And this is like such a perfect example of how, like in science, if a scientist is not pristine in their morality, the evidence that they're going to get from their experiments is going to be tainted, and it's not going to be useful evidence, and it's not going to be truthful. Because if they lie or cheat, or if they want to squidge the numbers a little bit so that they can write a paper that's going to be more popular, they might have a moment of popularity or a moment of visibility, but it's not going to be replicatable, and it's not going to get them any farther in their endeavors. So without this morality of truth seeking, you get nowhere. And then my final comment is, I heard a new verse to the song, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, and I just love it. It's, turn your eyes to the hillside where justice and mercy embrace. That's all I got to say.
So why do you think it talks about a hillside? Because I appreciate is that where the light hits first, perhaps? If you think of it visually.
Oh no, I mean the song, I think it's talking about Golgotha.
Oh, okay. I see okay.
Turn your eyes to the hillside where justice and mercy embrace.
Okay, perfect. No, I like that a lot. No, I like what you said. And now that you point out those aspects, I noticed that I looked in the same way that you described the painting, moving from the colors and the chunk and the closeness and the distance. And I think your point about the resources is very interesting as well, because if you think in the terms of good and evil, if you have what a certain amount, say if you're like I am, a father of a small family, and we have limited resources, and if I use those resources for my own glory or my own gain and spend them foolishly, then everyone around me is going to suffer. The innocence that relies on me is going to suffer, and that is very much an evil in my eyes. And so just that spending, that extravagant spending of resources is kind of the thing that comes to mind looking at it as you described it, Karen, just slowly diminishing as they run out of what they need to accomplish the goal that they've set for themselves. selfishly, I would argue, as well.
Yeah. I also find it that this particular painting and the biblical story that can be found in Genesis chapter 11, if I am not mistaken, it carries two different teachings. The one is symbolic, the symbolical teaching, let's say, and the other it's the allegorical. So we have and both of them. And in the case of the painting, of course, the actual tower, it represents, let's say, this abstract idea that the construction of the tower itself can be viewed as a symbolic representation of the Tower of Babel. And the construction of the tower itself, it's this symbolic representation of the human ambition, the pride, and even this desire to reach to the heavens. And of course, we can see it in two ways. One is the overreaching, and the other is this desire to transcend, let's say.
I like that, the overreaching and desire to transcend. It's an easy balance to fall out of when you're trying to understand things and you want to know more, but if that becomes corrupt, it turns to a consuming ambition as opposed to a productive growth, is the thought that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about what you said, Gabe, about how a good father has to restrain himself from misusing his resources so that he has adequate resources to take care of the family. And I think that's something that all this modern hating on men just does not take into account what it has required to build a civilization of fathers who have cared for their families, who have gathered scarce resources, oftentimes at great personal sacrifice. I mean, just in my own family, I know how much there are a lot of things that my husband would love to have that he doesn't have because he wants to make sure that we have a future. And that's a daily struggle for every person. I mean, every person has to, every time you go into Costco, you have to decide, how am I going to get out of here alive? Because you could buy everything in the store, you know, it's all cool. You want it all. It's all a great price. You just, you know, did you guys ever see that Veggie Tales called Madame Blueberry?
Yes, my kids watched that just a month or two ago.
It is such a brilliant metaphor. Honestly, she goes to Large Mart and she keeps buying and buying and buying until finally her house explodes. And that's a perfect metaphor for our world today. But anyway, the whole idea that men have to make sacrifices for their families. Of course, women make sacrifices too, but women make a different kind of sacrifice, right? So I just think we need to appreciate each other a whole lot more. And I also like what you said, Gabe, about justice and mercy in their balance. It's very much like when Jordan Peterson talks about the archetypal masculine and the archetypal feminine. The archetypal father has a good side of being, you know, just and supportive and all of those things, but then the bad side is the tyrannical side, the contemptuous side. And then the archetypal mother has the beautiful side of what mercy means, but then that can also turn into a twisted kind of a mercy that has only the consequence of lawlessness and basically destruction of the whole system. So there is something really there about the balance between justice and mercy.
Yeah, I think building on your point, you think of the I don't Paul van der Clay and Peterson talk about the overmother,
Yes.
who allows, who gives all that the child wants and requires nothing of them. There's a certain aspect of justice in holding the child to account in order to help them grow. And it's almost as if you pad every aspect of the child's life, they are not able to move out from the home. So part of what the mother has to do is allow the child to take those steps to move away from her and not hold on to the child, like bringing them in and not allowing every whim of the child, but being just in that sense of holding them to account for their own good. Trying to think how to say this more clearly, but that I think that's really what it comes down to. It's you have to make a decision not to allow certain things in order for your child to flourish, because part of their flourishing is growing up and moving out, and that's what that looks like, even just spatially, is a distance between you. And when that infant comes, you're attached in many ways very closely, like skin to skin, but over time you have to allow that child to move out and away from you. And I think part of that too, especially with boys, is the father being present and showing them the way forward and outward as they grow, and them together working in a system of justice and mercy, which is balanced to allow the child to grow in the best possible way, with accountability and opportunity, with discipline and encouragement. So I
Well,
like what you
I think a lot of that is inhibitory too, because every impulse of the mother, the natural impulse is to just want to take care of every need and nurture in every way. And it's so hard as a mother to remember moment by moment that that's ultimately a destructive impulse. And so it has to be inhibited all the time. And I mean, I can testify as a mother that there were a lot of times that I did not inhibit that adequately, you know, and if you really stop and think about these things, they go down so deep, and it's easy to judge other people. I mean, sometimes I hear Jordan Peterson going off on the overmother, and he's speaking about it from a father's perspective. He doesn't understand what a struggle it is for a mother who every single minute has to be calculating how much can I meet this need and how much must I not meet this need and for what purposes. And
yeah
life is complicated.
yeah I didn't mean, if I did at all, to
No,
make
no, I'm not talking about you. I'm just thinking it through on my own. Everything
Yeah.
you said was great. I totally
I
agree.
think too, it gives me the thought, the struggle of the mother is to put the weight of allow the weight of responsibility to fall on their child,
Yes,
and
exactly.
the struggle of the father is to hold them accountable as they move outward. Because it's easy, you think of the oppressive mother and the passive father is a common theme, where the father is not as involved as he should be, and the mother has to take up all the slack. And he comes home and plops down in his chair and turns on Sports Center, and she's worried about this, worried about that, you know, trying desperately, whether directly or passively, asking her husband to hold the children accountable to the responsibilities that they've been given. So it's again comes back to that union and that balance and the inhibition or the boundaries, as you mentioned, the working together to raise those children. You need that pushing out and pulling in. You need that weighing down and lifting up. And all of that has to be applied judiciously in order to avoid the issues of the extremes, such as the lawlessness or contempt that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I was listening to both of you and discussing this theme of the tower in terms of justice and especially this how it translates into the family. And in my head, one myth came, and I wanted to share it with you because I can see some link maybe there, at least in terms of this theme of human ambition, let's say, pride, and even the consequences of this tendency of humans to overreach. It's the myth of Icarus and Daedalus, and where basically Daedalus, the father, he constructed those wings, let's say, from feathers and wax, and he made two pairs, one for himself and one for his son Icarus. And he told him, the only thing I want you to not do is to get close to the sun. And Icarus, he did exactly that. He went too close to the sun, let's say, and the wax melted, and he found a tragic end. So I can also see something similar taking place in the biblical story and in the structure of the Tower of Babel as it is depicted in this painting.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good parallel.
So Haris, in that myth, is it the father saying this one thing do not do that causes his son to do it?
As far as I understand it, maybe, because isn't this the case with children? This time around, like for example, even with adults, the thing that you tell someone to not do is the thing that they will do. So I can understand this mechanism. Let's say it is at work there, being at work there.
There's a line I remember from, it might have been Walt Whitman, maybe, that I had to learn for some sort of theater thing I was in college. The one thing we tell the children not to do is not to put beans in their ears. And the one thing the children do is to put beans in their ears. That's just, that's exactly the way it is.
That makes me think of the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's like it's almost like if you give the child the knowledge of the fact that they can put beans in their ear prior to a sufficient growth of understanding where they can also know that there are negative effects to putting the beans in your ear. It's almost like you're exposing them prematurely it's almost like you're giving them the idea by exposing them perhaps prematurely to a warning. It's like, don't put your beans in your ear, and the kid, it's like, I can put beans in my ear and wants to know what that's like. So that's kind of, and to just quickly jump back to the Icarus and Daedalus, the way I remember the story is it was, and I may be wrong about this, but the way I remember it from having read it in school or whenever I did last, was his enthusiasm for the flight. So it's almost, the child did not have sufficient experience with responsibilities that had risk and consequence, that given too much of an opportunity, he was taken up by enthusiasm and ultimately crushed on the rocks as a result. So it's like, I know the situation of the story, I think they were trying to escape from a place, but at the same time, if the opportunity or the ability to do something comes before the maturity to manage it, I think in so many situations, children are carried off, whether it be by ill forces or enthusiasm. And so that,
Actually, I think there is something of value right there. Maybe also in the case of the story of the Tower of Babel, that element of enthusiasm was a driver too. So maybe that is something else that speaks to human beings in terms of ambition.
Yeah, and I love sugar.
Make it bigger,
Yeah.
Something like that.
Just something that popped into my mind. I love sugar, and the times that I struggle most with sugar are when I'm feeling depressed or I'm in a really good mood. And so it's almost like if you move too far into the anxiety and the depression, or too far out into the euphoria, my ability to control myself, it kind of, what is it, courage versus foolhardiness, that maybe C.S. Lewis talks about, kind of the virtues, they exist in that balanced state, and then if you move in one direction or another, it's that carrying away of the extreme. So that was just the thought that suddenly popped into my head. So, sorry.
That just shows how this stuff all winds together, because that comes right back to the inhibitory function of the two brain hemispheres.
Yeah.
And how important it is to have that balance, because if you let one side or the other take the balance, then you end up with, the overweening mother or the overweening AI taking over the world,
Yeah.
So, or the overweening enthusiasm.
Yes, overweening enthusiasm. Yeah. So let's move on to number 8, because we're gonna run out of time here if we don't keep moving.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see.
Oh, ce n'est pas une pipe.
Okay, so the next one in Gabriel's model is values, the principle of values. And for this particular principle of values, I have chosen a very nice painting, and one of my favorites. It's the Adoration of the Shepherds by Francesco Bassano. And of course, here we can see the birth of Christ being depicted within an, as you can see, it is taking place excuse me, it takes place symbolizing, let's say, the shepherds, showcasing the shepherds' humble offerings, and even the presence of animals like the lamb and the goat that symbolize innocence and sacrifice. So actually here you can see the I think that's a lamb and a cow, heifer, how you call it, that one. I'm not sure about the other animal. For me, this painting captures the event that we all know as the birth of Christ. And you can also see at the upper side of the painting, the angels, let's say, they are also depicted there. So this is our humble origins of the Christianity and of our faith that they are getting depicted here. I made the choice of choosing this painting for the values because I find it to be of paramount importance to have faith in this word. So yes, please, Capri.
I think of the moment just before this when the angels came singing and telling the shepherds of the good news. I think in the moment of because the dichotomy of values on my model is doctrine and doubt, and I think in that moment the shepherds were, in a sense, what's the word you use, Karen, often for something that happens that is unexpected?
Anomaly.
Anomaly. So they were presented with an anomaly, and they grew up in a culture with a tradition and an understanding of who God was and how he operated. And then suddenly they're confronted with the reality of that spiritual world and offered something new that was certainly unexpected. And they had a choice, I think, at that moment, maybe less though than just because of the grandeur of the moment, but they had a choice to listen to the angel or not. In the modern sense, it's like the people who say, I need to hear a voice or I need to see a vision to believe. And it's at the same time, even if those things happen, you still have to listen and you still have to go look and see the child and believe that what you're told, that you're not just hallucinating, that you're not just imagining the thing. You have to update your I guess in a sense what you value, because suddenly this anomaly comes and offers you a new value, a higher value, and you have to adjust, you have to make correction to your tradition in order to but yeah, you have to make a correction to your tradition based on the experience, the anomaly that you've experienced. If that makes sense. Kind of that balance between doctrine or doubt. If you have, it's almost like the blindness of a dogmatic doctrine. You think things could be, if you create such a limited and hard view of how you see the world, and there are many things that you are unable to see. So you have to have that balance of being able to see things, being able to see new things, being sensitive to anomalies that occur. But at the same time, if you're oversensitive, or what's the term Vervaeke uses, combinatorial explosiveness, or I don't know if that's the right one, but where all you see is everything all at once and you're overwhelmed. So it comes back to that balance between the value of tradition and the necessity of revelation, moving between those things, so that as these shepherds stood in the field with their traditions and their occupations, suddenly something new came and they had a choice to make, to drop what they were doing and see something new. And I know, Karen, you could probably speak better to how that shows up artistically in the painting with the colors and the way they light it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Well, I guess I'd like a little bit of clarity on why you see values as the kind of the contrast or the dichotomy between doctrine and doubt. I think what I hear you saying is that doctrine has two sides. It can either be life-giving or it can be squelching life. It can be tied down so tightly and so minutely that there's no room for revelation. And on the other side, doubt can be very destructive, but it can also open a little window for new thought and for new revelation. Did I get that right?
Yes, yes. I think a good way to frame this is with going back to the extremes of this particular one, as I did previously in the other ones. The extreme, as I mentioned, of doctrine is a dogma. So it's a thing that's hardened in a lot of ways where it's not up for negotiation or any sort of editing. And then the extreme of doubt is terror. So you think of terrorism, its goal is to sow doubt and division among people in order to blow things apart. And so you have those, in between those two extremes, you have this process of writing and editing. It's like you're writing your doctrine, but at the same time you maintain a healthy state of doubt so that you can properly account for any anomaly and interpret that anomaly against what you've written down. Kind of goes back to the painting with the body, when we did the section on the body and they were doing that autopsy. They had the book where they had written down, or at least as I assumed, they had written down the knowledge they had about how the body worked. But in front of them, they had this anomaly of a human body opened up. And so there was an opportunity to see deeper and to understand, have a greater understanding of the body as a result of looking into the thing directly. So it's that avoiding those extremes of dogma and terror that lead you to a disconnect. You think of a dogma, a church that locks itself in its walls and doesn't change its doctrine, just turns to a tomb, and a society full of terror splits. Say you have civilization as we do now, and you see what's happening as media and whatever means they use, social media as well, are just constantly injecting terror for the sake of, for eyeballs and clicks, and even more sinisterly, potentially for manipulation, that you see tribalism coming back because it's that the extreme of dogma is a schism and the extreme of terror is a schism. It's a splitting up. And these tribes are forming in an effort to survive or to rebuild some semblance of stability amidst this onslaught of terror, if that kind of touches on what you were asking.
Gabriel, Karen, if you allow me just to make a small comment here, what Gabriel is saying about the terror aspect, I find it to be really profound, and in terms of the birth of the Messiah and depicted in this painting, it reminded me of the decree that Herod issued for the killing of all the children in the region. So that was an act of terror that basically it's the extremity, let's say, of having your values gone berserk or gone wrong.
And I think his goal too was to divide up and essentially crush this groundswell of truth in the manifestation of Christ, like the new king. I think he was maybe not thinking on eternal spiritual matters, but just the matter of the wise men saying a king was born and that being a threat to his rule. So in order to maintain that power, he sought to do so by causing terror, which divides the strength of a community and doesn't allow that groundswell that would be a threat to his rule. So I like that you brought that up. I think that certainly applies.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there.
Well, we can go on to
one of the things that I always think about is you become like what you look at. And there's a number of verses in scripture that point that out. I think it's Psalm 115 that talks about you become like whatever idol it is that you make. And so I'm thinking about doctrine and doubt, and how where the problem comes in is if you put either one on the throne, it is not sufficient for it's not sufficient for good governance, either personally of your own life or governance of a community or a society or a civilization, because each is only half of the story, right? So you can't put either one on the throne. And kind of what we've done today is put doubt on the throne. If you have doubts, then you become, one of the intellects, and the one that everybody looks to, because he's an agnostic. So he surely has more to share with us than somebody who's some dumb believer, or, he's an atheist. We should listen to him because he's obviously thought deeply about these things, because we're putting doubt on the throne. And then if you put doubt on the throne, then you're always looking at that, and that becomes your guiding light, right? And likewise, if you put doctrine on the throne and that becomes your guiding light, then you have a dead belief. There's nothing left of it anymore. So, yeah. So in terms of this painting, one of the things that I think is beautiful about the composition is the way that through not just the use of light and the use of color, but each of the people in the painting, obviously they have their eyes fixed on Jesus. And even the lamb has been, ordinarily that lamb would be other way around, right? It would be kneeling. So the lamb is either in the position of being sacrificed or just lying that direction, because even the lamb is looking at Christ in this painting. So the artist has gotten all of our eyes to look in only one direction. It's like when you're in a stage production, they always teach you, if you're one of the side actors on the stage, that whoever's talking, that's where your eyes need to be. Because if somebody looks at the stage and they look at you and you're not the main character, they need to follow your eyes over to where the main character is. And so that's what this artist has done. Doesn't matter who you look at, their eyes are going to lead you right to Christ. And just structurally, what's been done here is to take dark value and make that the dominant value of this painting. It's almost dominant. It's almost 80% in the darkness. And that's also to point up the light, because the light is going to be far more important if it's the focal point of the painting. That was a trick that Rembrandt used to play too, was make the darkness the majority of the painting. Yeah.
So he's almost deliberately encouraging you to look at the anomaly.
Yeah.
Like, see the anomaly and adjust accordingly.
Well, and isn't it kind of interesting that the baby is kind of the anomaly in every family? When they show up, yeah, everything changes.
That is a good example.
and in any gathering, you have a family gathering, it doesn't matter if there's 20 adults in the room. If there's a baby, that's all you ever look at. You look at the baby.
Yeah, and every one of them is as new as the last.
Yes.
By the way, something small, a technical remark. I have also found another depiction of the very same theme from the same painter, and it was, instead of a portrait format, it was on a landscape, and it is a bit larger, let's say. It doesn't include the angels at the top, but it moves and extend, let's say, the participation of the shepherds and also the animals. So you get also a goat there and all of that. So I wanted to ask you, Karen, is this normal practice to create two different versions of the same painting, let's say?
Well, I mean, for myself, I discovered through this one teacher that I had that that's the way that you spark your creativity, is to do the same painting many, 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 many times, and then try to think, how could I represent this in a different way, you know? And honestly, if you look back at the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, they're telling the story. They're telling this story over and over and over and over again. And every single artist does it in a different way. And this is what builds on the richness of it and tells the story and more. When you look at this painting and you start taking it apart, you start seeing all sorts of things in there that would really guide your thinking about what this story means. And that's what has happened throughout history. And that would be great to talk about another time, but we kind of need to plow it because I have a hard stop on this because I've got another conversation coming up soon. So let's move on to number 9.
Haris, you have
So-
2 for perception. Which one would you prefer to start with?
Yes, basically, let's go through them both quickly. Let's start with Saint Jerome. That one, it's a beautiful painting, and actually, it's an unfinished work carried out by Leonardo da Vinci, and of course, this is once again. We are talking about the Italian Renaissance period. I really found it extremely nice that you have included as your 9th principle, the principle of perception. So the reason I wanted to include this painting, it wasn't only for the, I wanted to play it on 2 different aspects. One was the actual topic, where we have Saint Jerome in the wilderness, and the other one, it's the unfinished nature of the painting. So the first aspect, basically, it is connected into the one of the paintings that we have seen in the previous part, that had to do with the anchorite that he was praying. And in this case, of course, we can see Saint Jerome in the wilderness. And this aspect of the unfinished work of art, I think it is also somehow associated with the unfinished structure of the tower that we have covered before in the principle of morality. So, any thoughts on this?
The dichotomy I have for perception is wisdom and knowledge, and I think the way to initially relate this is the knowledge in my mind turns inward as a sort of categorization of information, and wisdom turns outward in an effort to provide understanding via contextualization. And so I think moving out into the wilderness is kind of, you think of the many stories of men, even Jesus moving out into the wilderness, and I'm sure there are many things going on in that space, but at the same time, when you go for a walk in nature, or you just need a minute outside while you're at work, it's all it's recontextualizing your situation. It's almost, it's say you're working a job perhaps you don't so much enjoy, and your vision is narrowed in on that computer screen, and your thoughts are rolling over your negative experience in the moment of being somewhere you don't want to be. And in order to provide context, you have to go for a moment out into nature, out into the wilderness, to be reminded of the greater context that you are in, the greater story, the potentially greater role that you might play one day if you are diligent with the things that you have in front of you. And as far as the incompleteness, I think just what comes to mind is it's a good doing sketching in a sketchbook. For me, it moves back and forth between a state of completeness and unfinishedness, because you start to draw that line, and then, or you draw it more lightly to find where it belongs. And then over time, as you build that sketch out in those rough lines, you are able to come back and start to draw more defined lines with more pressure, because all those lines that you've drawn now have it's like you're building little categories of a head and a foot and an arm and a torso, and you're sketching those out. But as you build those categories, they also develop a context in reference to one another. So you're drawing those harder lines, you're coming back and referencing the arm to the torso to the leg. And between moving in that space of categorization and contextualization, you are able to refine the image that you're creating to be a truer version of whatever it is you're trying to capture.
Yeah, I really like that. I love unfinished paintings like this, especially of the masters, because it helps you kind of see where they're coming from, where they're going. And the other thing that I really like about an unfinished painting is that the whole process of painting is finding the image on the page to kind of begin to match up with the image that's in your head. And as it begins to reveal itself, there's so much space there for wisdom and knowledge for the artist and also for the viewer, because it's unfinished. So where it's unfinished, there's always, you get to supply some of the details yourself. You get to imagine what was the intent of the artist. You get to imagine where this would be headed. And as I'm looking at this and thinking about the wilderness and thinking about, it's obvious that he's in a moment of having a confrontation or an experience with God. And the lion is so evocative there, because the lion can represent either the roaring lion that's seeking to devour, or the roaring lion that's seeking to bring life and eternity into our lives. And so you can see it both ways. This lion is either his friend or his enemy. But in that moment, he's so enraptured with God that there's no fear. You know, perfect love drives out all fear. And the image is just invested with all kinds of power. And again, I think that it's invested with that power because of the very strong contrast of the dark and the light. It just gleams off the page. It's just a very, very beautiful image.
Yeah.
I think you mentioning him looking up to God, it's almost he's somewhat prostrating himself before God and moving towards the lion. And I like the contrast of, you think the strength of a lion, but even then, like, he's he's willing to risk moving closer to the lion in the presence of a much greater power. Is just kind of the thought that
Yeah.
popped up.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that according to the story of Saint Jerome, in this particular advanced stage of his life, he was a hermit, and he went to the wilderness, and he actually became a friend with that lion. And the reason was because the lion was crying in pain, and Saint Jerome reached towards the lion and removed a thorn that the lion had stuck on his paw. So, as you said, Karen, this lion and the Saint Jerome, they were friends. So, but once again, as Gabriel said, he found the courage to approach that creature, let's say.
Yeah. An excess of mercy. I mean, an exercise of mercy. So why do you think the other image represents perception, Haris?
Yeah, the reason I wanted to, I also included this one is because I wanted to also bring some of the more modern painters. This is one of my favorite paintings from Magritte, René Magritte, and this, it has to do with perception in the following aspect. It includes that a line in French, ceci n'est pas une pipe, that means that this is not a pipe. And actually that's a meta message that is interpolated on top of the work of art. So it also has to do with what Alfred Korzybski was saying, that I had a block now. Let me find my notes. So yeah, the map is not the territory. So there is something more beyond, let's say, the realm of our perception, and it has to do with the fact that that meta message that is interpolated on the painting, it reveals these extra layers, let's say, that they are already present all the time. So this is why I wanted to include also that painting, to cover that aspect of reality and perception, of perception.
I like that. It makes me think, because wisdom, touching on the extremes of perception, wisdom without information, you label everything a threat, which can throw you into a panic, and panic is what I have as the extreme. And knowledge without wisdom is meaningless, because the knowledge has no purpose. And so this kind of, I think, in a small way captures that. It tells you this is not a pipe, and if you had wisdom without information, you wouldn't be able to smoke your tobacco, because you would simply, or maybe I'm getting that backward. If you had knowledge without understanding, you wouldn't be able to smoke your tobacco, because the knowledge you were given is that was not a pipe. But wisdom would tell you otherwise, because you can see the function of the shape, and vice versa. Well, I think I'll just leave it at that. I think that's a good way to put it in context of my model of perception, is just being given knowledge, but not having the wisdom to discern whether or not what you're being told is true.
Now, the thing that's so interesting about this painting is the effort that he went to make it look absolutely realistic. So the form and the color and the way the light is hitting it, and not just rough light, but you can tell exactly what kind of material it's made out of, and that it's that kind of material that's not super shiny, but there's enough of a shine on there that it kind of gleams in the light. He went to such effort to make it absolutely realistic so that he could say, no matter how good your map is, this is not the territory, right?
Yeah.
Um,
But at the same time too, it's not a pipe, it's a painting. So he's
yeah, I
it-
mean, there's many layers to that, but
Yeah.
he went to a lot of effort to make his point.
Mhm.
Great. Let's move to the final one.
Yes.
Actually, we're gonna go through this quickly, but once again, as we are reaching to the completion of the presentation of the 10 principles of Gabriel's model, we are reaching reality. And for this particular principle, I have chosen to showcase another favorite painting of mine that is called The Ambassadors. It's by Hans Holbein the Younger. And it is a painting that is full in rich in symbolism. And it includes various objects that represents the wealth and knowledge, let's say, in various domains of knowledge. And you can see that you can actually see that it includes 3 layers. If we start from the top layer, we can see the items like the globe, like the astrolabe, that has to do with studying the realms of the heavens, the stars and the planets. Then we have the middle layer that also includes a musical instrument and book, and this represents things that they are even closer to us in terms of our daily life. And here the painter has used a very particular technique called anamorphosis, and he had included in a very strange way this diagonal figure. That figure actually, it's a skull, and the reason that they used to have this, it was in terms of memento mori. This is how they used to call them. You remember Hamlet having one skull, and he was having his meditations, let's say, in order to remind himself of our human clay-like nature. And the painter here decided to include also that element along with all the other objects that they are found over there and the various symbols. But he did it in this particular way where you can actually see that particular skull. You need to go from a very particular angle while observing the actual painting. So you need to go from a slant angle in order to decipher what even that is. So once again, this has to do not only with the reality, but I even find it a bit connected with the previous aspect of perception.
No, I like that, and thank you so much for all the thought and effort you've put into presenting these. I've just really enjoyed this process of going through these paintings that you've chosen. And when it comes to reality, I definitely the adjacent aspects of perception and consciousness. It's like reality exists to a degree between them. It's the aspect of communication between perception and consciousness. And one of the inner dichotomy of contest that I have for that aspect of reality is realization and actualization. It's kind of like that. If you think of the skull in particular in the front, once you realize what the artist has done, you can see clearly what is actually there. It's like it becomes, once the mental aspect of realization sinks in, the material reality of what you're looking at is actualized. And so and a big part, I like that the knowledge and scientific instruments are included, because a big part of reality, I call it the aspect of measurement. And it's kind of where the scientific process lands for me, is you have the hypothesis and you have the observation, but in the midst of it, you have the experimentation and analyzation. So it's that turning in and turning out and experimenting on what you've come across, and then turning in and analyzing what it is, the data you've collected, and trying to develop a hypothesis based on what you've observed. And so it's just that interaction between the mental reality and the material reality, which is the dichotomy of the inner and the outer. And contesting your prior perception of reality against new data to help you further refine your perspective. I think it's yeah.
So
Yeah,
that last 2 minutes that you just did there, Gabe, is exactly the picture that I have of how art works and how science works and how life experience works. They're all using that same model. That's
Yeah.
That's just the way the universe works.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to say about this painting is that it's a perfect example of, I think, of subsidiary focal integration, which is that thing that Esther Meek is always talking about, where when you're offered the opportunity of covenantal knowing, of learning something new from outside, it comes complete with all these little subsidiary things, the massive complexity that, the combinatorial explosiveness of what's out there is offering itself to you. And in this painting, that's exactly what he's doing. He's offering us this picture, purposely making it too much for us to take in at once. And therefore, you have to allow this subsidiary focal integration to work, to kind of open your mind, to allow the general impression to inhabit your spirit, rather than any one particular proposition. Any one particular proposition is not going to grab you here, because there's too much going on. And it's sort of like, it's an offering. It's like an offering.
yeah.
And it makes me think of, there's quite a few people nowadays that talk about the adjacent possible, which is like when you come to the edge of your knowing, that's where the transcendent resides. When you come to the edge of your knowing and you start making mistakes, that's where the opportunity is to find truth. And that in that adjacent possible is where all the creative opportunities live.
Wow, that's great. Allow me 20 seconds to just make a small point here, and trying to link everything together as we conclude this presentation. Gabriel, do you remember the first figure that you have sketched? It also included a skull, and you have also written down the word collapse. So that's something else I wanted to discuss a bit with you. And if you remember that one, it was the very first one.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I think collapse, in my mind, because I sat down and drew that first one in one sitting. It's like all the things I'd been thinking about and working with kind of all came together and coalesced in my mind, and I was able to sit down and pretty much write draw that first one out, start to finish, without stopping. And I made a few edits here and there, but overall it fell into place. And the collapse for me was what happens when the extremes, when the system is inverted and suddenly the extremes are, everything is upside down. You're living in a system of extremes instead of a system of logos. So the logos, you move in that space of balance, kind of like we talked about with marriage, but to invert that would cause the marriage to collapse, and that's when things fall apart. It's the death, the death in two directions, the inward death and the outer death. And what you end up with is uniformity. You think of us, we're all equal in death. It's everything is uniform on the side of collapse. It all falls to, it's all crushed to nothing or blown out to bits. It becomes uniform in one direction or the other. But in that state of balance, in that state of logos, there is creativity, there is variety, there is opportunity to make something new and to see something new come about in the new life of a child. And so that, for me, that's what collapse ultimately is. It's the uniformization of things, whether crushing them down in a tyranny or blowing them apart in a war. It's the final end of dogma or the ultimate outcome of terror. And the goal should be to align ourselves with the logos and to live in that balanced state where there is variety and creativity and union and relationship and a healthy tension between the inside and the outside.
Thank you. I really felt that the painter here, he was also into this type of collapse with this anamorphosis in the skull. So I found it really interesting that, some things they are too striking, let's say, to not notice. So I hope that was helpful. Since we are pushing a bit forward to close with this wonderful conversation, I will ask Gabriel if it's possible to showcase the last one. This is the bonus. It's a bonus item, and it has to do with something that I found from some historical lectures, let's say, from a scientist called Thomas Young. He was a British polymath, and he made various contributions in many fields, in mechanics, solid mechanics, in terms of optics, and even language, and specifically for Egyptology. So he was actually one of the instrumental figures in terms of deciphering the Egyptian hieroglyphics by utilizing the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. So I've discovered this plate, let's say, from his lectures. It's a very old one, but it was kept in the archives. And basically there is a figure number 444 that particularly attracted my focus, let's say, as it reminded me of some of your illustrations, Gabriel. So I wanted to say that your illustrations and your diagrams, they also have this scientific aspect to it that is evident. And I wanted to also share this finding with you and with Carl.
No, I like that a lot. I enjoy diagrams like this. I think I've grown up in doing art my whole life, but I'm definitely bent in the direction of engineering and design. And that's a big part of how I think and how I try to communicate my ideas is in that way. And just drawing those images helps me to understand and communicate those things. So I appreciate
Great.
the
This
bonus.
particular one has to do with optics, so you can see the difference in these distinctions there.
Yeah, I really like this too. And offsite, I'll send you guys another artist whose work is very reminiscent of this plate here. And just to wrap it up, I would like to say, Gabriel, in regard to that idea of collapse being when things fall apart, and I mean, this is what everybody's talking about right now with the meta crisis. But on the other side of collapse is surrender. And surrender is infinitely creative. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you guys. This has been wonderful. And Haris, for you putting together all these paintings and thinking through how they connect up with Gabe's work. It's just very powerful to me that you put that much effort into it and gave us this opportunity to talk. And I need to go because I've got another conversation in 5 minutes. But this has been fantastic. Let's talk again soon.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Karen. Bye.
Bye.